Well, I want to thank Dr. Taylor for a very powerful documentary. This is the second or third time I've seen it, and I'm moved by it every time. We're now going to bring our panelists out to answer questions from the audience. I'm going to introduce each of the panelists, and some of them are still coming up here. Let me introduce the ones that are sitting here. I've already introduced Dr. Taylor. Already seated is Dr. Benjamin Pauly. He's a resident of Flint and an assistant professor of social science at Kettering University. And he's an author of a forthcoming book called Flint Fights Back, Environmental Justice and Democracy in the Flint Water Crisis. We have Miss Claire McClinton, who you recognize from the documentary. She's a Flint resident, citizen activist who has become a national figure as one of the leaders of Flint's struggle to expose the root cause of the water crisis. We have Dr. Pam Pugh, Chief Public Health Advisor for the City of Flint. And I'd like to add, too, that Dr. Pugh is an alumna of the University of Michigan. She got her doctorate in public health in 2014. I was proud to be on her committee. We have, let's see, who, Dr. Reynolds is, okay. We have one more panelist. I'm going to introduce him anyway, even though I think he'll be coming in a minute. Dr. Lawrence Reynolds is a Flint pediatrician who served on the Flint Water Advisory Task Force and Governor Snyder's Environmental Justice Work Group. I was also a member of that work group and had the honor and pleasure to get to know Dr. Reynolds, one of the most dedicated and effective human beings I've met, and he's also on the panel. So, and I've already introduced Dr. Taylor, so I think we're ready for questions from the audience. So what we are going to do is, students on this side? Okay, so if you're a student, we'd like you to come to this microphone over on this side of the room, and there's another microphone on the other side. So if you're a non-student or a resident or from Ann Arbor or elsewhere, please use that microphone over here. And please bring forth your question, and I'm going to be the moderator here and kind of direct it to people, or if people on the panel would like to answer, please go ahead. So do we have, oh, here's Dr. Reynolds, so already introduced him. Okay, so do we have a questioner coming up? Anyone? Oh, okay.
The movie was so painful. I'm wondering if you can tell us if you have gotten to the position where you know what the best way forward is for Flint, because the movie left us with a lot of questions about what's the best thing to do here. As members of the Flint community, are you all together on what the plan is, and could you share that with us?
Well, I'm a pediatrician, and you've heard in some of the commentary, it was said that children witness their parents being extremely anxious, and of course, it carries over into the mood of the children. Our children can read us like a book. But understand, if you feed your newborn formula that's mixed with lead-tainted water for 6 months, as a pediatrician would recommend if you're not breastfeeding, for 6 months, every day, 5 times a day, that child is drinking formula that's been tainted with lead, ingesting it, incorporated into their bodies, It only stays in the blood for 30 days. It stays in the brain, lead stays in the brain for a year. Lead stays in the bone for decades. So it's the gift, the curse that keeps on giving. Because when you are low in calcium, iron, with insufficient vitamin C intake, the lead comes out from the bone. Now, we have no way of accurately measuring chronic low-level lead exposure in children, or in adults for that matter. What we can do, there are some research techniques, K-scale fluoroscopy, that will give you an idea of how much lead there's in the bone or in the teeth, but it's not entirely accurate for young children. So we're also at the edge, we call it an evidence desert as far as medical treatment goes. And that means that, yes, we knew what to do when the blood lead level was 45 and someone was acutely poisoned, but we don't know what to do when the blood lead level is under 10, under 5. And understand, when I graduated from medical school, 25 was an acceptable blood lead level. So as we got better equipment to measure blood lead levels, no matter how limited they may be in usefulness, as we got better equipment, we also got better tools to assess the neurocognitive deficits and damage caused by lead. And then we have the problem of the insult is distant. The damage or evidence thereof of a problem is distant from that initial toxic exposure or poisoning. So you don't see those problems until a child reaches those normal developmental challenges where you expect a certain pattern of behaviors. So we have work to do, and I give you this long answer so you understand we have not solved the problem of what we are going to do with chronic low-level lead exposure, despite having evidence that it affects the community health. Now, I'm sorry, there's no short answer, but it shifts the IQ level of a population to the left. So instead of those nice 5% tails on each end and the bell curve, you've shifted it to the left, which means you have fewer children in the community who are high functioning and more children in the community who have these functional challenges. And so, many times people come to us and expect us to say, we have a third eye now because we've been poisoned by lead. No, it doesn't work that way. And it doesn't show up that way. This is something that will be manifest in a population over the years. So what are we going to do? Well, we live in a state where the Michigan Department of Education has been cited by the feds for having insufficient public health services. So we take the civil legal course, and now that's involved in court because we're trying to get a neurodevelopmental center of excellence. Now the pipes, what we've done is we have had a damaged system that leaks 40% right now, today. There's a 40% water loss. We have an aged water distribution system where anything can happen, including water main breaks, and if something leaks out, the pressure goes down and something else leaks in. We need a rebuilt system. And that's the shortest answer I can come up with.
And so I wanted to yield because I'm from Saginaw, Michigan, and so I came to the city of Flint in October of 2016, so I want to always make sure I yield to the residents of Flint. One of the things that the city of Flint did, first of all, is put public health in all decision making. So my existence within the city of Flint was the first, well, I shouldn't say the first, but that definitely is making sure that we have public health voice. One of the first things that I did when I got there is reconvene the Technical Advisory Council. I understand that it was there before. I saw remnants of probably the first Technical Advisory Council that was there before I got there, but I always listen and look to the advising of Dr. Reynolds. There are some of our research scientists that are out there, Nancy Love, Sean, and Michelle, that are out there. So we really try to make sure that everything that we do is based on science from those independent scientists as well as the medical community. Dr. Reynolds alluded to the fact that we've been doing replacement of water lines, water service lines. So we've completed about 14,000 or so excavations, meaning that we've gone in, we've looked to identify what the pipes are made up of, and then we've replaced around 7,000. It was projected that somewhere at least 18,000 pipes needed to be replaced. So that is what we're looking forward to doing. There are some of the things that Dr. Reynolds mentioned as far as the children. We don't know. We have absolutely no idea what the impact will be on not only the children but the adults. But there has been a lead registry that has been funded that Dr. Monahan Atisha oversees, and that is just to monitor, as well as making sure that we can connect families, children, and residents to services. So I think I'll stop there, but as far as our path forward, I was with all the school leaders. I won't say all, but all were invited, all of those folks who are superintendents of schools in the city of Flint. And we were with them yesterday. And they've made it very clear that they're not moving forward until they hear from the medical community. Dr. Reynolds has said he's not moving forward until he's checked off with the scientific research community. So we're working hand in hand. And I just have to thank God that Mayor Weaver allows me to be me and allows me to make sure that we're hearing from these two groups. So I think that is a huge piece, and then we'll talk about other things that are going on, hopefully later on tonight.
Thank you.
But we have to be clear. The engineering community has to sign off, because how can the medical community say everything's fine if the water distribution system and processing is falling apart and we don't have the sufficiently certified staff to operate and monitor the water system in the city? And that's why we have continued to say the system is not stable for these reasons, and to make your risk as minimal as possible, continue to use bottled water, especially if you have children under 6, you're pregnant, you have an immune compromise, or any other chronic metabolic condition.
Thank you very much. And I realized I was supposed to allow all the panelists an opening statement, so maybe we'll have a closing statement if you don't get what you wanted to say by the end. So we'll have to take the next question, please.
Have any other cities or communities turned to you for advice about lead in their water or their infrastructure?
Yes, so infrastructure, actually a year ago, the San Juan mayor asked Mayor Weaver to be the spokesperson for her for that. Just last week or this week, today, I was talking to Dr. Vitti about school water issues. Philadelphia, I've gone out to Pittsburgh because they've had some issues. One of the folks from Philadelphia has consulted us. So many folks from that level and cities have definitely consulted us, but I'm sure residents have also. I've also been to East Chicago. So when their situation came about, so we are definitely trying to make sure that others learn from this tragedy and no one ever goes through this again. As it relates to the schools, I will add to what Dr. Reynolds was saying, not just the schools, everything. The state has been the gift that keeps on giving. If we listen to Dr. Edwards on that piece where he said that we should commend the state. But the state has constantly tried to get us to move faster than we should be moving. But not only do we want to make sure we get it right for Flint and make Flint whole, put them in a place that's far better than when this crisis began, but making sure that other communities learn from us.
Thank you very much. Next question, please.
First of all, very well done. I am confident that your message is definitely going to have an impact. I come from a community about 15 minutes from here that hasn't had running water since 1996. And one of the reasons that our community failed in our social movement is some homes lost water and others didn't. And we still don't have water today, so we did, in fact, fail. I'm curious, what's different about Flint? It sounds like some households had a problem, others didn't. You might have two people in one household, one had lead poisoning, others didn't. How did you really bring the community together to have a socially impactful social movement?
Well, one of the first things that needed to be established was that there was, in fact, a system-wide problem, because you did have problems cropping up at individual houses, and those consisted of changes in the water, so discoloration of the water, changes in smell, in taste, but also health symptoms of various kinds. So you had people's hair falling out, as you heard in the film. You had people developing skin conditions. And when you're experiencing that firsthand, you don't necessarily know at first that it's happening to anybody but you until you start talking to your neighbors, until you start talking to your friends, until you start talking to your family. And in many ways, that's how the water movement came together in Flint, is that people started sharing information, people started talking about what was going on. And there are a lot of people who got involved who were new to activism, who were mobilized by their direct personal experience with contaminated water. Thankfully, there were also some other activists around, like Claire, who'd been at it for a while, and they had already been fighting for democracy in Flint since 2011. And they had experience, and they had skills, and they had organization. And so when those newcomers were looking for a way to ensure that they and their families had clean water, it was people like Claire who really helped them to, I think, gain a deeper understanding of what was going on in the city of Flint. People were talking not only about water, but talking about democracy, talking about the political and economic context that was responsible for their polluted water. And they also got to know people who did have that organizing experience. And as I see it, there were really those two streams that came together to make water activism in Flint what it was. And so we saw a coalition form in early 2015 that was really instrumental in helping to get the city off of the Flint River. And so in some ways, it was a unique confluence of circumstances in Flint, but it goes to show how important it was just to have kind of the energy and the pathos of those folks who were new to activism, but were, of course, concerned for their lives, literally, and the lives of their children. But that really came together with people who, were able to give the movement more of a shape and a direction and more of a political analysis that really got to the root of what had happened.
Thank you. Ms. McGlynn, you want to add anything to that?
Well, I'll just say first, thank you for inviting us here, and thank you for all the folks, not just tonight, but around the state and around the country, who has reached out to Flint, and you've sent your love, your money, your bottles of water, and we need all of that because this is a moral question. This is a question of humanity. And what we have to do in this election cycle is we have to demand that our government reflect the humanity of the people in this great country. And that also means demanding from them here in Michigan, no person should walk into office without a commitment to resolving the issues in Flint around the water and committing to the wonderful report and the recommendations that was made about how to resolve the problem. And we've got some big shoulders to fill. In the film, we spoke about the sit-down strike, but we've also, history has brought us to another point in Flint, because everybody's looking at Flint. And it's being said that, well, we got places that's worse than Flint and blah, blah, blah. But one thing that we have already claimed victory, and that is we brought the issue of clean, affordable water on the national stage. And we claim victory for that. So everybody is looking to see how we're going to come out of this. And what we have to do is we have to make sure, as I said, that all of, whether it's the dog catcher or whatever you're running for office, what is your program to lift up the livelihood and the future of a Flint? So that's all I'll say for now.
Thank you very much. Next question, please.
Hey, I was recently reading a book called The Poisoning of Michigan, and it described an incident in the 1970s that I found to have like a lot of similarities to the ones in Flint, where a bunch of feed was contaminated by industrial chemicals and poisoned farmers, and like worked its way up to the food chain and eventually poisoned people. And I saw in the book that it also described like a similar response by state and government officials, where they basically denied there was a problem, and it was citizens, in this case farmers, who had to do the fact-finding, and they were the ones who were really acknowledged the problem. And so given that Michigan apparently has a history of trying to cover up poisonings of its citizens, I was just wondering what kind of institutional change is needed at the state government level to keep problems from Flint or this 1970s PBB problem again?
Well, speaking as a member with Dr. Paul Mohai as part of the governor's environmental justice work group, at the beginning of our deliberations, we made it quite clear, we can give you all the recommendations in the world, but if you don't implement an environmental justice plan, those recommendations will, some may have some effect, but it won't move Michigan forward. And so we suggested strongly that he look at the 2009 Environmental Justice Plan. We said, well, you have some things in your plan that you wrote, your administration wrote in 2010, and you also put that on the shelf, but you need to look at 2009 and update it. And that's what we actually built our 33 recommendations around. And the key is that we have resident input into permits, extension, new permits, renewal of permits, any changes in function in, say, plants or factories, and that we have an ombudsperson so that if there is an issue, the citizens and the residents can contact that person directly, and that ombudsman can make a determination and then bring it back through the Environmental Justice Advisory Group and also through the interagency coordinating group. You would be shocked that the agencies do not openly communicate with each other on the record when there's a problem. So the Department of Transportation may do something, the DEQ may do something, Health and Human Services may do something, and we already have discussed not testing water in the schools. Why wasn't that loophole not addressed since 1992? And when the problem is identified, why does one agency cover it up? So we've insisted that there be an ombudsman for citizen access. We insisted that there be an interagency work group. We insisted that there be an advisory group. We even went so detailed as to insist that there be a school water quality monitoring program that is tested and then implemented and followed up on. That's enough.
If I can add to what Dr. Reynolds said, another important recommendation was that we said that childhood lead poisoning should be eliminated from the state. And when the Detroit story that the superintendent decided that the students weren't going to be using the water in the schools, it came to mind that we had a recommendation in the report we sent to the governor in March that essentially mandated routine, regular water testing. It was a rather detailed recommendation. It was more than a simple statement. And so I would say that if people are not familiar with those 33 environmental justice recommendations, I think you can find it on the internet simply by putting Michigan environmental justice governor, maybe those 4 words, and you'll get the plan. It came out in March of 2000 of this past year. I do believe that if those 33 recommendations were implemented, we'd go a long way. And the other thing I wanted to add, that those recommendations are the state's second attempt. I was on the prior work group 8 or 10 years ago, and Pam, I don't know if you were on that 8 or 10. Yes, you were. That's right, you were. Nothing happened with that plan either. The governor actually attended one of our work group meetings in January, I believe, and I was shocked when he said that he didn't know anything about the 2010 plan because nobody put it in front of him. I mean, we've heard that story before. He wasn't told, or people told him something different than what you guys are telling me. And frankly, I think it's a very tiring excuse for not doing anything. He came out with an environmental justice executive directive just in July, maybe 6 weeks ago. When I read it, I saw 2 of the 33 recommendations in it. Create an interagency work group that would include the heads of some of the main agencies like the DEQ and the Department of Health and Services. And it also talked about the environmental justice ombudsman. But where were the other 31 recommendations? And that's why I wanted to emphasize at the beginning that he still has time to do more. And we have a gubernatorial race. I'd like to know from each of the candidates, what are they going to do to implement those 33 recommendations? What are they going to do for Flint? And what are they going to do to make sure that environmental justice comes to Michigan? Because if you look at the report, the title is somewhat grandiose. We're going to be the global leaders in environmental justice. And it's going to be hard to swallow if it just sits on somebody's shelf again.
And I'll just say, to directly answer your question, did you ask what can we do, or what should we do?
What changes should the government make?
Well, first of all, I think that we have to make sure that we, as a people, are voting in the right people, because we've talked about these plans, we've written plans. 2004, we were doing Eliminate Childhood Lead Poisoning. I was on Governor Granholm's task force around childhood lead poisoning. So we knew everything about, we know about several environmental contaminants and how exposure harms the body, especially children. Lead is the most studied. So that contaminant, we were trying to eliminate that years ago, and we had a plan to do that We were on the Department of Environmental Quality under Granholm administration, where we developed language that then went into a directive for Governor Granholm that turned into the work group that we sat on. Things were smooth sailing until it started looking like the person who's now in office was going to be in office, and it was like the last day. And then we found out that people who were sitting around the table with us wanted some of the stronger pieces and language in the document ousted. So not only did Governor Snyder lose the document that we published, it was a more watered down version of what we initially started with. But bottom line is, if you don't have people to implement all of these plans that we keep developing and fund them, then it's not going to change, and we'll continue to be at these points where we are today. I could say more about the testing of schools, because that's where we're trying to make sure that we do not leave ourselves in a place where we do one and dones, where we do testing of water and then the school's fine, and then we don't know if the lead levels are high in the water again until a group of children or a cluster of children have high lead levels. So there's a lot of work. In Flint, we have water testing of our businesses, of our restaurants, but we don't have anything in place to have routine testing of our babies, of the children's schools. So that's not in place. There's no regulation. There was no thought, but we're not going to leave it there. We're going to work together, and we're going to fight to figure out some way to at least put a fight forward to get that done. I was there when Governor Snyder, and not to bash this, but when he said, told Flint to get over it. So I'm not going to try to wait on that one. But so I think that we have to think about how we talk to our elected officials and make sure that we do everything that we can to get people who support these things in office.
I think people should look at the 33 environmental justice recommendations that came out in March by the Environmental Justice Work Group that Governor Snyder created and was forwarded to him in March, and then asked everyone that's up for election this year what they plan to do to make sure those recommendations are implemented. Yes.
Yes, my name is Donald Johnson. Now, I've got a couple clarifications here because I've been reading about this. It's my understanding that the water through the main lines, the main pipes, okay, because of the coatings and things, is basically safe as anybody else's, that the problem comes from the point of entry from the street to the house and the pipes inside of the house. Now, my question is, how much per unit, per house, would it cost to replace all these lines with PVC or whatever it would take to make them safe? Are we talking $15,000, $20,000 per house to replace?
Well, first of all, the water mains that run down the middle of the street in Flint are not in the best shape themselves. They've been part of the problem.
Okay.
We have a lot of water main breaks in Flint. We had a lot of water main breaks before we switched onto the river, and we had more afterwards. And
Now,
so we...
Excuse me. So when you have a water main break or when you replace a pipe, haven't you introduced a problem that didn't exist at that juncture, at that break point, where the old piping is exposed at least momentarily, so you got a 2 or 3 week spike maybe in the material. So you every time, if you don't do it all at once, doing it piecemeal causes a problem to keep on. Is that correct?
Potentially, we have that concern. First of all, in that individual household, like my household, the lead spiked after the lead service line was replaced, and then it dropped. There are some specific engineering circumstances that I'm not qualified to answer for, where potentially you could have some backflow into the water main and it carried to another house potentially. But because of those questions, the medical community as well as the city has told folks keep using filters, and for specific populations use bottled water, because we can't see what's going on underground, as you may be alluding
Okay,
to.
so this is my issue. Okay, so these are 100-year houses, each one of them, right? So if you're taking a 100-year house, is it almost economically more feasible to dynamite the house, start all over again? Because the replacement cost of each of these individual house lines is fairly high. Is that correct?
Well, my answer to that would be, I mean, there's communities that are poison, and people say, why don't you just move? So, you know, I just don't think that that's a feasible answer.
That's what they said in New Orleans. Why don't you just move?
No, I understand that. What I'm asking is, should we be investing towards replacement rather than the wholesale replacement or minor replacement? What should be the emphasis?
We just put in an intended use plan to the EPA to do some of the main replacements. We're doing that, the line replacements that you talked about. Some people have been able to get some of the fixtures in their homes replaced, and so we're still pushing for funding for that and still looking for funding for that. There are appliances that were damaged. You know, it could be anything from like a a refrigerator that has a water unit to it, to water heaters. Though some of those are being replaced. Dishwashers that were damaged because of the corrosion. We're not pushing for whole homes to be replaced, but we are, again, through the $100 million $120 million that we received from federal government and state government. Actually, it was a little bit more than that after the consent order with the concerned pastors. So some of these things are already being fixed through that funding that residents really fought for. Mayor Weaver really fought for that funding, and we're still asking for those additional funds for premise plumbing that was being repaired. So we are still piecemeal putting things back together. As Dr. Reynolds said, we don't want to be on bottled water forever. That's not what we're advocating for. But what we're advocating for is that bottled water be made available to school children, to the special populations that have been identified by the medical community, and that filters are made available until all of these disturbances and the work that we're doing is completed. So hopefully that answered your question.
Thank you very much. Next question, please.
Yes, do I need to do I need to introduce myself or anything? Okay, well, my name is Lit Kurtz. First of all, I just want to applaud your group for the work that you have done. I didn't get all of the details necessarily. I know there's a lot of work going forward, but I'm going to go off on a little tangent here. As I was listening, I felt that a lot of things that you said resonated with what I'm experiencing or have experienced for the last 5 years with housing instability. The lack of input from politicians, their lack of caring or having, noticing the humanitarian needs that exist in their community. So I'm just wondering, and I feel like I write for a local street paper and I do some other things, but I feel like I'm just like operating a bubble. I feel no one's really listening. So I'm just wondering what advice you might be able to offer in terms of connecting with politicians, galvanizing. I mean, I know this sort of happened sort of just out of the blue, but how would you suggest that a person such as myself and other concerned members of my community, try to get politicians on board with what we consider a crisis?
I'd like to take a shot at that. Well, for one thing, we just have to keep making our voices heard, and we have to get organized. Now, these people are up for election in a few weeks, and if they don't hear you now, forget about it. Mm-hmm. Now, in April of the 4 years, we call it a commemoration, a 4-year commemoration. We passed 1,600 days and counting of the Flint water crisis. But one of the things we did, we went to Lansing and we made some noise and we put eviction notice on all the state representatives' doors. If you don't step up and fix Flint, you're out of here. Because our thing is, we have permanent interests. We don't have permanent friends. So this is election time. Organization is better if you can get 2 or 3 people to go and start challenging these politicians at these campaign meetings and so on and so forth. And the other thing I want to say while I'm got the mic is that this issue of the water and water rights and all the rest of it and ecological justice and all the rest of it, these are political questions. At the end of the day, it's the politics determine what the outcome is going to be. And the people, like I said earlier, the people know right from wrong and they respond. But we got to make our government representatives respond to our needs. And that's what we have to do. And so, in closing, what is happening politically in Flint right now is that there is a public relations and a action plan, a counteraction to the Flint water crisis. They're doing certain things like stop distributing water from the state. They stopped that in early April. Because what's the message? That's a political message. We're done with Flint. We're washing our hands. When he said get over it, that means we're through with y'all. But we're not, but our answer is we're not through with you.
Yeah.
You might be through with us, but we're not through with you. So the other thing that they did was they're using certain so-called experts to say that the water is safe. And they even went so far as to publish an article in the New York Times, an op-ed piece that said, you know, the children of Flint wasn't really poisoned. Really? Yeah. Where did they get that from? Absolutely. So what they're doing is they're trying to deny, diminish, and destroy the severity of the Flint water crisis. Because what's going on right now, we are in court, the residents is in court trying to get compensation. So if they can get people to say, you know, all this big hoo-ha about the Flint water crisis and poison and things like that, it wasn't really that, to try to diminish it, wipe it away so they don't have to take responsibility for what they did. So when people are saying, I want to run and represent, I would ask anybody in this state that's right, what are you going to do for Flint? Because we're the face of government abandonment. We was poisoned by our government. So that's all I'll say right now.
All right, I appreciate your input. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You had a question, please.
First, incredible movie. Good job. I don't want you to put down the mic yet, because I think your role as a resident activist is so important because of the insight that you have into what the community needs. You know. Right now, I have a 2-part question. I want to know what the immediate needs of Flint residents are. What the immediate needs are. Aside from more donations, more water, what are the basic needs? And also, what are the organizations and the contacts, the leaders, aside from yourself, the partners that you trust the most, that you would want those in the room who cared enough to stick around this long, that you would want those in the room to send their money and water and donations to, that when you say, this is what Flint wants, and they are inspired enough to give what you say Flint wants, that you would want them to send that to this group. What are those groups? And then the second part, I want to know what your list of demands would be. You answered a little bit. You said you want to make sure that those that we would want to elect would commit to Flint. What exactly, the first few things, would you want them to commit to Flint?
Well, thank you for your questions. The first thing that we want them to do is to restore the water distribution centers, because we're in the process, and we're not trying to act like nothing has happened, but they're trying to push us backward. We're trying to go forward, and they're trying to push us backward. So we need those points of distribution, we call them water pods, restored. The governor, day one, should restore the water pods while we complete the pipe replacement program. Because we've got seniors and everything in our community, they can't go out there and pick up that water. They've cut the funds to the city. We used to have young people hired to deliver water to seniors and disabled. That's what we need. That's just to get by. It's what we need. And on a broader scale, we did have some demands. The coalition of all the groups that work together is about 5 or 6 of them. We call ourselves water warriors, but we had different groups. And one of the things we demanded is that we want the federal government to declare Flint a disaster area. They declared an emergency, and they sent in revolving funds with 1,000 strings attached to it. We want disaster money, and here's another environmental problem. And I have learned, and I never dreamt I would be an environmental person, but I'm from the trade union. I don't know about this stuff, but we know that bottled water is not eco-friendly. You know, a lot of the environmentalists are very resistant to continue use of bottled water, but we're in an emergency. But if they had declared a disaster area, they could have brought in the water buffaloes and let residents just go get them some water as they needed it. Why is that so complicated? And then the other thing that we've demanded is just abolish the emergency manager law. And we also demanded, as a broad coalition of community groups, that we be given Medicare, single-payer Medicare for all impacted Flint residents. And hope this can be used as a model for the nation. They have did this in Libby, Montana. When toxic chemicals was released in Libby, Montana, in the Affordable Care Act, they slid in their provision, every impacted resident in Libby, Montana has Medicare regardless of age. And that includes, like, for people that was more negatively affected, staying in their home, getting home care and all that kind of stuff. We want that for Flint. That's what we want. And as far as and I could go on, but I won't. But as far as the groups that we trust, and I'm not saying these are the only ones, but these are the ones that we recommend people to, and that is the Salvation Army, because they're dependable when they get money. They're dependable about making sure residents get the help. And also Catholic Charities and third, Woodside Church. Those are the three that we feel comfortable with people sending donations to and things like that. Thank you.
As a pediatrician, I must say that the children need to be screened for developmental delays and behavioral problems. They need to be evaluated, and they need to get proper services. And that's what we need in the entire state of Michigan, but specifically in environmental justice communities like Flint that have had a toxic exposure. We need adequate services in order to do those assessments so that we can maximize the potential of our children. So education is a significant need. And remember, we live in a state where we were told it is not the state's responsibility to assure literacy. The state only provides places where literacy can be achieved, if you call it that. And many of you may not know, over $27 million has been spent for the defense and prosecution of those people who were involved in the Flint water crisis. $27 million. The entire public defender budget for the entire Genesee County was $25 million. So here we have some number of people. Well, we have the 15 who have been indicted or charged, and then you contrast that with an entire county of people who needed services from a public defender, and their bill was less. We need to insist that the governor terminate the employment of those people who have been charged, suspend the people who are under preliminary investigation, and we need that done now.
And I think from a policy or advocacy standpoint, a lot of the resources that we've received have a lifetime, a short lifetime, 3 to 5 years. And so everything from the registry to our Medicaid expansion to some of the nutrition services that we have in the schools, some of the other things that Dr. Reynolds mentioned that are in the schools, those have like a 3 to 5 year lifespan on them. So we do need advocacy around making sure that those supports are in place. When we did the lead registry, we went to New York City and we looked at the World Trade Center's registry. And theirs from the federal government was etched in stone. I can't remember for how many years, but it's several years on out that their registry will be alive. Ours was for 5 years. And I want to say the registry, I need to look it up, but I think it's at least, I want to say, I'm not going to say, but it's for many years on out. And so those are the things that we need to advocate for as well, or need advocacy and support.
Thank you very much. We have one more questioner? Or, yes, please, go ahead. Oh, we have two. Okay. Please go ahead.
Hi, thank you all so much for the great work that you've done so far. My name's Enrique, and I'm currently a PhD student in environmental engineering. And I have this dual personas that are constantly battling within me. One of them is the scientist who's really focused on the physics, the chemistry, the biology. And then there's the other one who's more of an activist and is concerned about environmental justice. I grew up in the city of Houston, where I saw stormwater issues affecting the poorer communities that had higher percentages of people of color, and they're more adversely affected, and so that's really present in my mind. But as a scientific community, I think we struggle with this line of scientists and activists, and when are we able to cross this boundary, and does that boundary even exist, and why do we hold ourselves to that? So my question is, what is your advice to scientists who want to ensure that they're standing up for environmental justice, but want to maintain their credibility with the communities that they hope to serve and help?
If I may, I feel like I have a kind of a unique perspective on this question as somebody who has a background as an activist, but is also an academic, although I'm a social scientist, so whether or not that's a real scientist, we could probably debate. But anyway, I have had the good fortune of getting to know and work with some of the scientists who have been doing some really amazing work in Flint, some of whom are here tonight. And so I've been able to see...
And we thank you.
And we thank you, yes. So I've been able to witness more or less firsthand the conduct of a variety of scientists in Flint. And one of the things that was interesting to me about what the activists achieved back in 2015 is that they established a pretty incredible partnership in the summer of that year with an academic scientist by the name of Mark Edwards, featured in the film, in order to confirm that there was a system-wide problem of lead contamination in Flint. And it's worth stressing that the support from Dr. Edwards and his team was critical. The activists could not have done what they did without it. But it's also worth stressing that they were the ones who really drove that work on the ground. And they made sure that science in Flint was being put to good use and that considerations of justice were really driving that work. Now, one of the things that came out of that is that Dr. Edwards himself kind of had to defend himself to his own discipline. Because, of course, it's not every day that you do see environmental engineers or other kinds of engineers, for that matter, throwing in their lot with the residents of a city like Flint and at least purportedly putting their interests and agendas first. And there was a lot of talk about that intervention being a quote-unquote gold standard that other engineers and other scientists could look to for inspiration, and that could in fact be replicated in other parts of the country. You probably gathered from the film that the story gets a little bit more complicated, especially from January 2016 on. Of course, it's no fault of Cedric's that not all of that complication makes it into the film, because some of it is rather recent. But this is a case in which the film, I think, will need a part 2 at some point. What that part 2 will reveal, I think, is that this individual who was credited with creating a kind of symbiosis of engineering and science and activism, really beginning with his attack on Scott Smith. And if anyone's interested in discussing the limitations of Scott Smith, we can do that. But what I think we'll see is that really established a pattern of bullying and harassment and open attacks on a variety of people. And it began with Scott, but then the hit list kind of grew and grew from that point on, and it ended up including a number of, I think, very respectable and principled scientists, fellow academics. It included journalists. It included Flint residents. And one of the things that we saw happening along the way is a kind of tension being posited between good science, so-called, and activism. And I think that what Mark ultimately decided is that activists fundamentally, at least Flint activists, who knows how far he would generalize, don't really care about the truth at the end of the day. That they turn to science when it's useful to them, but when it starts to conflict with their agenda, they abandon it. And they pursue their political motives, even if that means engaging in dishonesty and unscrupulous behavior. And having gotten to know the activists on the ground myself, I mean, we all know that when you're engaging in activism, sometimes the most important thing is simply that you get people's attention and simply that you're heard. And activists have a variety of ways of trying to get people's attention. And I don't think that that agenda is at all inherently incompatible with the scientific enterprise. I think that there are ways of that being incorporated into a kind of scientific agenda, as long as the various parties really understand each other and where they're coming from and what their objectives are. Unfortunately, whatever partnership was established early on between science and activism broke down in this case. And so we ended up with an individual who basically turned on the people that he once worked with. One of the individuals in the film is somebody who's now being sued by Mark Edwards for $3 million for defamation. And this was following a letter that was put together and signed by 60 residents of Flint, as well as a variety of outside supporters, that was basically calling for help and was calling for an investigation into the behavior of Dr. Edwards. And that was followed up by a support letter from some academics that I had something to do with. Thankfully, there was a group of very principled academics that came together in order to speak out about what was going on and make sure that Flint residents who wanted to speak out were not bullied into silence as others have been. But now we have a lawsuit that unfortunately has, and it's not just against the one activist from the film, but a couple of other activists from another poison city in Washington, D.C. It really, in my estimation, is a historic abuse of professional power. I'm not sure of another example of an endowed chair professor intervening in poison cities from the outside, profiting hugely off of that intervention from a professional perspective to the tunes of recently of millions of dollars from the EPA, and then suing residents of those cities into oblivion when they have the nerve to speak out about what's going on and to raise concerns and criticisms. And that's the situation that we're in right now. And I think it's tragic for a variety of reasons. One reason is that people like myself who are incredibly disturbed by this now have to wonder if we're going to be the next to get sued for saying exactly the things that I'm saying right now. But part of the deeper underlying tragedy is that there was this real opportunity, I think, to bring science and activism together in Flint in a way that really was a model for other cities. And I think that broke down to the detriment of everyone involved. And so I'm hoping that there's a way of learning some lessons from all of this that we can indeed carry forward and apply to other contexts.
Thanks very much, Ben.
Just one comment. Everybody can be a social justice, whatever you are. And you can be a social justice doctor, you can be a social justice lawyer, you can be a social justice UAW member, and you can be a social justice water warrior. Whatever your lot in life, you can be a fighter for social justice.
And I'll just say that for me, I just have to sleep at night. So that's always standing on right. It's always speaking whatever I believe is truth as I know it. It's making sure that I'm seeking out truth. And so that's pretty much the standard that I go by.
Thank you very much. I think we had one more question, or maybe we'll make this the last question for the evening.
It's actually just a gratitude more than a question. I'm from California. I've lived in Utah and North Carolina, and I have heard of the Flint water crisis a little bit through the media and lead in the water, but I honestly didn't know where it came from. I didn't understand the switch from the Detroit water to the Flint River. There's a lot in that film that was like really informative for me, and I really appreciate you putting it together and the community speaking out and telling your story, and I hope you get a good circulation because it's important. You know, these stories are happening around the country, and remediation needs to happen and the systems need to change, and really appreciate your part in it.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Well, we're coming to a close, but I just wanted to give the panelists an opportunity if there's anything that they wanted to say they didn't get around to. I don't think Dr. Taylor had much of a chance, and I have a couple of questions that I have two, and you can pick either one you want, Cedric. One is, at what point did you decide you were going to make this documentary? And the other question is, as you were making it and completed it, what was the most important new thing that you learned as a result of doing the documentary?
Well, originally, when I started this whole project, I was actually in Detroit at the time. Detroit was going through its version of a water crisis with regards to, the massive shutoffs that were happening in 2014. I hadn't heard anything. I heard some things about Flint, and I heard about maybe TTHMs. They weren't talking about lead at that point. But I had a suspicion that these circumstances were somehow connected, and I wasn't quite sure. And so after talking to people, more and more Flint residents, the idea was to have a film that would encapsulate both the Detroit and Flint stories. But, once I got started, I went right down the rabbit hole. I mean, there's just so much that, unfortunately, I couldn't even include in this, right? So I made the painful decision to focus just on Flint and save the Detroit leg for another time. Because it was very difficult to construct a coherent storyline. In this film, you saw discussions about emergency management, philosophies of government, science, the science wars, the science disagreements, and so forth. So, it was a challenge to connect all these stories, but I think it paid off in the end. And the second question was,
what was the profoundly new thing you learned as a result of putting it together?
Wow, I guess when Claire was talking about the legacy of Flint, the willingness and ability for people to get together, organize, and stand up. It's one thing to read about it, or it's another thing to actually see it in action. It's one thing to see those grainy old, video footage of the strikes and, so forth. But to actually see people in the midst of their pain, come together, for something good, I mean, that's something that, never leaves you. So.
Thank you very much. Well, I think we're at a close unless a panelist wants to say anything further, Dr. Brown.
Yes. We have a person sitting in this audience who is a Flintstone, Professor Bunyan Bryant. And we claim him still. And for those of you who are students, if you go on his website and you look at his CV, you'll see some poetry, but you'll also see 8 answers for people who oppose environmental justice. And those questions and answers are just as accurate and prescient now as they were then. And I really urge you all to take a look at Dr. Mohai's colleagues' 8 questions. It's simple. You can read it in 30 minutes, but it's a foundation on which you can build when you're approached with questions about environmental justice. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Professor Bunyan Bryant, Flintstone.
Thank you. Pam, you wanted to say something?
I just wanted to thank you for the movie. It was very touching, and it's really good to continue to be inspired and make sure that we remember what it is that we're doing and why it is that I'm doing what I do every day. So I first want to thank you for that. And then as I talked about how important the medical and the research community is, but in City Hall, we are really driven by folks like Claire, folks like Paul, but really, Ben, Pauly. But folks like Claire, and so the voice of activism, it was asked, how did Flint do what they did? But really taking that information, taking their voice and making sure that that is the data that we live by in City Hall. So I can't thank you all enough for all of your activism, and I hope that you realize how much we appreciate that. And thank you, Dr. Mohai. And I also want to say that there are some really great plans out there. We just need to make sure that those plans are implemented, and that's where we now spend our time, focusing on making sure that they're implemented versus writing more.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And I think before we go, we'd be remiss if we didn't appreciate some of the folks who were in the film who are here in the room and acknowledge how incredibly brave they were to participate. Lendra, Nakia, Jalen, thank you for telling your story.
Well, thank you very much, everybody. It's really greatly appreciated for the audience attendance and participation. So I want to thank everyone who came and asked all the great questions. I really want to thank this expert panel. I learned a lot. Even though I know many of the people on the panel, I learned something new every time I hear them speak. And the greatest thank is to Dr. Taylor for producing this incredible documentary, not only documenting for all time some of the detail that gets lost in 2-minute news reports, but also for keeping the public's eye on the Flint water crisis. This is something that can be passed on from city to city, from one year to the next, from generation to generation, and he's documented for all time, for a long time to come, all of this incredible detail about what's happened in Flint. So thank you very much.
I'd just like to really quick thank the School of Environment and Sustainability for making all of this possible. Thank you so much for providing this this venue. Also, the plan is to have this online at some point, more widely accessible. So if you could go on noranydropfilm.com, if you could join the mailing list, you can be given a heads up as to when we'll be doing screenings or when this is going to be actually available for the general public. Also, we have a Facebook page too, so, like and share. All right? Thanks.
Thank you very much, everyone.